Why, hello, and welcome to another episode of Heathen Dad. I'm your host, Wolf the Red. Today, I want to discuss the Norse concept of the Fylgja, a concept I want to stress that I personally believe to be one of the best kept secrets, while also being one of the most important aspects of heathenry. This is, in my opinion, just as important as understanding the gods, the wights, and the ancestors. The problem being that the concept actually gets frequently overlooked by the majority of modern heathens, and if any attention is given to it, misconceptions often run rampant to the point of detriment. We have many stories, both in ancient myth and folklore, that have survived through time and conversation and into modern practices that give us puzzle pieces that make up an interesting picture that is the Fylgja. So, I'm sure you're wondering, what is the Fylgja? It's actually better if I dispel some of those aforementioned misconceptions of what a Fylgja isn't first. The Fylgja is not the Norse version of the Native American or indigenous spirit animal. Indigenous spirit animals are a complex subject, and it would be hard to explain everything, even in a succinct way, especially since there's variation from tribe to tribe. So due to its complexity and being out of my wheelhouse to speak on, I reached out to my good friend Vali, who is an indigenous practitioner who also syncretizes with Norse heathenry, and they gave me some useful words for this video. They described the difference of a spirit animal being something gained through ritual or initiation, involving intense physical or mental states, and the Fylgja doesn't serve anywhere close to the same purpose, structure, or backgrounds. They are not related at all and should not be used or described interchangeably. I see people do this pretty often. Valley also insisted it's important to mention that not all tribes have the same views and not all tribes have spirit animals, and to some tribes the concept is incredibly foreign and something that's pressed upon them by white people who assume all native people have a spirit animal. So, if you thought they were at all connected, I implore you to pour that information from your cup so that I may attempt to fill it with something more useful. I'm going to include a couple links below for you to check out that Valley gave me, and also a link to Valley's channel if you want more info. So, what is a Fylgja, if not a Norse spirit animal? Well, it's a spirit that often takes its shape as an animal. Alright, wait. Don't click off, let me explain. Fylgja, or the plural Fyljur, also seen as Fylgjakuna, are a part of the human soul. In heathenry, we have the concept of the multi-part soul that my good friend Ocean Keltoy has a fantastic video on. The Fylgja is a part of the soul that is separated from us and attaches itself to us at our births. It can be conceptualized as our own spiritual afterbirth that is created when we enter the world. So too do the Fylgja enter the world from the well of Urthabrunnar, which is the well of Uther, and the place from which all fate is woven by the fate keepers themselves, the Norns. An interesting parallel I found in this is that the physical afterbirth is what sustains us in the womb, giving us the life we need before we enter the world, whereas the Fylgja is the part of our soul that watches over us and gives us protection after we enter the world. An important note to make is that the Fylgja are not described in the Poetic or Prose Eddas, which we use to get our view of the gods and how ancient heathens would have understood those gods, albeit through a Christian lens. But they are mentioned often enough in the sagas and surviving folklore. That's really neat, because we use those sources to show us the cultural understanding of the day-to-day for those heathens of old. Concepts like souls, spirits, and Fylgja were ingrained in the culture and not directly tied to the gods, meaning heathens have always been inherently spiritual people. The Fylgja, or fetch as it is sometimes translated, is often characterized as a form of specter or shade or wraith. There are Scandinavian folk tradition writings that have been passed down describing them sometimes as human-shaped and feminine in presentation. There is reason to suspect that there could be a connection to the matriarchal familial line, sometimes referred to as the Dis. Whereas the Dis are often associated with the family, the Fylgja is associated with the individual. A side note here is that in many, but not all the folklore stories, the Fylgja takes on those human shapes, whereas in the sagas, typically they are portrayed in animal shapes. The shape the animal phantom presents itself as is a little ambiguous in nature, but in many folklore stories, it's stated that its appearance is a reflection of the personality of the human it's attached to. To give an example, let's say someone you know is very wise and enjoys the water and loves to explore but is sometimes shy. Their Fylgja could be that of an octopus. Or if you met someone who is outgoing and strong-willed and fierce, they could take on the Fylgja of a lion. It's really interesting to think about what someone's Fylgja may or may not be. And I say interesting to think about because they are typically impossible to see under normal circumstances, save for a few specific instances. According to both sagas and folklore, the only way to see your Fylgja while clear-minded and awake is preceding your own death. That's not ideal conditions, if I may be so bold to say. But there are many stories where a Fylgja has shown itself to its human, and shortly after, something tragic happens, ending the human's life. There is the case of Njals Saga, where Thorth sees a bloody goat laid out before him. Njal makes a comment to his friend that this must be his Fylgja, because no one else can see the goat on the ground before them, and Thorth, therefore, must be about to die. Tough news to get from your bestie, but lo and behold, Thorth is killed shortly after this in a fight between the families in Njals Saga. Aside of dying, which is a mega bummer, there are a few instances of people having something called the second sight that allows them to see the Fylgja of others. They can sometimes interact with them and can describe them to their owners. Another less permanent instance of being able to see one's own animal specter is in a dream. We have some stories where people are visited by an animal they feel a close connection to in the moment. Sometimes that animal acts as a guide during the dream and can offer protection from that which may seek to harm even in dreamland. In those dreams, sometimes the Fylgja can give warnings of impending danger or premonitions of unpleasant times ahead. Being that the Fylgja is a reflection of and permanently connected to the human they are a part of, whatever happens to the human also happens to the Fylgja. Knowing this helps make sense that the Fylgja would be looking out for us when we are vulnerable. It would want to protect us due to the world that affects us also influences not only its physical nature, but its personality and behavior. It's important to remember that the Fylgja is a form of living entity on its own. It has its own thoughts and desires, but they will not work against you because they want what's best for you, due to that being also what's best for them, seeing as they are a mirror part of you, after all. Whereas the Fylgja, being tied to the individual, could be referred to as the Mannsfylgja, we have another possible form called the Kynfylgja, or Fylgja of the family or kindred. This is the idea that the family as a whole has shared traits, goals, and ideas that they work together to achieve while utilizing the attributes of an animal guide to influence their collective fate. Through that work from generation to generation, we see this single wraith watch over the whole family as they stay together and travel down the same path. An example of this we can look to is in Olafs Saga, Tryggvasonnar, from the Flateyjarbók. There is a young boy named Thorstein, who was raised away from his true family. A man who happened to be his grandfather was able to see his Fylgja using the second sight described earlier, and sees that it is a white bear cub, most likely a polar bear. That old man remarked that there is no way his parents could be who he was living with, because the white bear was a symbol of nobility and strength that would have been more closely related to his true family, which was of noble lineage. I'll circle back to this example a few times in a bit, but it does outline how families can be tied together and recognized by their Kynfylgja. And of course, a holdover we can easily point to throughout history is a family coat of arms that often showcase a family animal in its design. While they may not be aware of their familial Fylgja, or even have a connection to it, the influence on the design is apparent in those cultures. Another interesting concept we have is the idea of the Aettarfylgja, or group Fylgja, a chosen animal spirit that belongs to a certain group of people that share a common trait and purpose. A great example of this in history are the mighty Berserkers in the fierce Ulfhednar, who take the bear and wolf respectively as group Fylgja of sorts. It's not one that they are born with, but it is in an essence that they adopt and internalize, letting it shape their personalities and attributes, both on and off the battlefield. Sound familiar? The Ulfhednar and Berserkers alike were known damn near halfway around the world. They were even known to contract out as mercenaries and left their homes to fight for coin due to how good of warriors they were. The animal warriors often used extra substances to push their bodies beyond their limits, being able to ignore fatigue and pain past what normal warriors were able to do. The Ulfhednar are described as being more lean and agile in battle, able to outmaneuver their opponents and use daggers and sea-axes that were better than axes and swords in close combat. They would swipe and stab much like a wolf strikes and bites. Berserkers, on the other hand, were huge hulking masses that could swing with all the power of a bear paw, using longer swords and axes to mimic that of a bear claw, tearing and slashing. This is just one way a group could adopt the aspects of an animal Fylgja and use it to shape personalities and attributes. So here, we have described 3 seemingly separate kinds of Fylgja. They appear tiered in a way, starting with the individual, moving up to the family with its many people, both of blood and adoption, and then we broaden the concept to a chosen group of people, who most likely start as strangers on some level, while the Fylgja may be the only thing uniting them. 3 separate cases, 3 distinct groups, 3 kinds of Fylgja. But what if it wasn't? What if it was not the person or persons who changed with each connection of a new Fylgja, but instead it was the same Fylgja from birth that changed with the individual over time? If we are shaped in personality by our Fylgja, and our Fylgja changes attributes to reflect us, think about how much we ourselves are altered due to outside influence in our day-to-day lives. Think back to school days and your group of friends you hung around steadily. Think about how they impacted your interests and humor and perspectives on life. Then think about your first job. How much your coworkers changed those perspectives and interests. As we grow and move through life, we are bombarded by inputs from so many sources and groups. We are undoubtedly impacted by those inputs. So, maybe it's not the individual utilizing several Fylgja from different sources, but one Fylgja, the same from birth, that changes and evolves with you over time as you grow and change. Your toddler Fylgja may have been a mouse as you learned to crawl, but then growing up with siblings and cousins, Perhaps as you became more playful and rowdy, your Fylgja transforms with you into an excited dog. Then, as you study and work alongside your father, as he bestows wisdom on you, the Fylgja blossoms into an owl, reflecting your own mind's growth. And then, if you so happen to find yourself on the battlefield as you train and fight, the inner bear or wolf reveals itself, and the warrior within is reflected in the animal spirit. So, not 3 or more Fylgja, but one growing and changing over time, reflecting us just as we grow and change, as we reflect off those around us. To me, knowing how important and impactful the Fylgja was and still is to those who keep the tradition, it just doesn't make sense that there would be multiple Fylgja attaching themselves to a single person. New Fylgja are not being born from Uther's Well just because you join a new group. The animal guide is important and unique in structure and function, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence of multiple Fylgja connected to one individual. So, now that we have a solid understanding of what the Fylgja is and how it may grow over time, let's talk about that function mentioned earlier. What does a Fylgja actually do? Well, would you believe me that you could send your Fylgja ahead of you on your way to your friend's house and have it alert people to your comings? In many folklore stories, the shade appears before people in another location and gives them early warning or premonitions of someone coming. This is sometimes referred to as a Vardoger, which is specifically the experience of a premonitory sound or sight of a person before they arrive. This is directly tied to the Fylgja function. In one story, a rail worker is known for his Vardoger and would send it ahead of him on his way home. His wife, a while away, could hear her husband walking around their home, but she knew it was his Vardoger, being so used to this happening, and would get up and start cooking his supper so that it would be ready for him before he arrived in full. Another fun story is that of a boy waiting for his mother to come home from the mill. There was a hill in the distance, and he saw her walking down towards the home, and then all the way to the door. When she didn't open it, he turned the handle for her, but saw she was gone and had vanished. Confused, he went back to the window and saw her walking down the hill again. When he asked her about it, she explained he met her Vardoger. Seems useful, no? Speaking of doors and Fylgja, it's important, according to folklore, to make sure that you keep your Fylgja close when leaving a room or home. In one case, a boy is always seen to the door and then walked all the way outside by his aunt, saying that she wanted to make sure his Fylgja did not stay behind. According to some popular folk belief, if you are separated from your Fylgja, it can cause sickness or even insanity. That's crazy. Another way the Fylgja can be utilized is sending it out to search and gather information for you. Think of it like your own personal version of a raven of old One Eye himself. One of the absolute best and wildest examples of this is in the Saga of King Hrolf Kraki, which I recommend you all read. It's short and full of fun. But in that saga, the late King Halfdan, who was murdered by his twisted brother King Frodi, had 2 sons who fled their home to family friends nearby island to hide from King Frodi's wrath. King Frodi consulted with a group of Galdermen who used their Fylgja to search the nearby area and even farther away to the island offshore. It's important to note that they were up against the powerful spell weaver Valef, who was protecting the boys, and he noted that the air was full of powerful Fylgja. Another neat example of folkloric tale of a Finnish man who leaves his body behind during a static trance and sends his Fylgja out on a journey to travel in his stead. On a personal note, I have talked with individuals myself who have also described a similar practice to me where they do the traveling themselves, and the Fylgja stays behind and watches over them. Of course, you may take this at face value. I just thought it was interesting to hear about it, and then also read nearly the same account from almost 100 years ago. Remember that white bear cub I mentioned earlier that Thorstein was connected to? The way that old man noticed it in the first place was that the bear cub's spirit stopped short in front of the boy, and he tripped over it. Yes, he tripped over it, meaning the cub was solid enough to affect the person it was tied to. As I'm sure you're probably thinking, the implications and ramifications of this detail could very well mean a great deal. Imagine the possibilities of sending your Fylgja across the room to poke your friend, or move an object just a bit, or helping you out of a dangerous situation when you're alone. It's honestly a lot to think about. One interesting excerpt we have is from the Saga of Sturlaugs Starfsama. Two men get in a fight, and in the middle of their scrap, they seem to disappear, and in their place, two dogs end up biting and snapping at one another, before those also vanish, with two eagles soaring above, peck and scratching at each other, until one perishes. It is heavily implied these animals were the men shape-shifting, using a connection to their Fylgja. It is very strange that they are able to take the shape of more than one animal, if this is the case. But the wildest and most insane story we have is from a different saga of Olaf Tryggvasonnar, this time found in the Heimskringla. Now, I need to take a moment and explain that there seems to be several sagas of Olaf Tryggvasonnar, 2 in Latin and 3 in Old Norse. It's all about the same Olaf, but it's scattered around in different books. It's like if we were to write about our mate Tom and called it Tom's Story, but every time we wrote a new book about him, we just kept calling it Tom's Story over and over again, even though new things happened each time and covered other people around Tom. Please understand how absolutely brain-shattering this was for me to have to figure out why I kept running into the same name when sourcing back my different Fylgja stories. Fun times. Anyways, in the saga, we have a very powerful Galderman, who has somehow formed a bond with his Fylgja that is so strong, he can take the form of it physically and whole cloth turns himself into a whale. A freaking whale! He swam to Iceland and encountered many landwights or spirits there. Many of those spirits were mighty and magical beasts, including a dragon, a giant bird whose wings were so large that when they flapped, they touched each mountainside in the middle of a massive fjord. He was eventually chased away from that shore by a giant bull guarding it. And when he tried to swim around, he was confronted by a mountain giant that stood taller than the mountains themselves, with a large iron bar in his hand. That's some incredible Fylgja synergy, if I do say so myself. A neat thing to note from that saga is that story became the direct inspiration for the government of Iceland to adopt those 4 figures on their official coat of arms for the country and reference the saga directly on their government website. Okay, so we know what the Fylgja is, and we know what the Fylgja is capable of. Now, how do we determine what our animal spirit looks like? You definitely don't want to see it while you're awake, and you don't want to hope for the right dream to see it. You probably don't have a friend with the second sight mentioned earlier who can see it for you. So what do? Well, there's an interesting ceremony outlined in a folkloric tale where you take a small knife and wrap it tightly in a cloth or handkerchief. You then pass it around in front of you from one hand to the other and then behind you, repeating this action in a circular pattern 3 times while stating plainly, "My Fylgja is a blank," and you fill in the name of the animal. You can start with any animal and just go down the list of animals over and over until the cloth undoes itself as you move it from hand to hand. When the cloth does come undone, whatever animal you were saying at that time would then be your Fylgja. Now, I have opinions on this. I think that while this process is interesting, given what all we know now about how the Fylgja are formed and grow, I do not think this ceremony is the best way to go about discovering what your Fylgja may look like. It takes the growth and evolution process that we've gone over completely out of the picture. First, we all have our biases and desires. I'm sure many of us would love to have the Fylgja of a noble bear. And if you start your animal call-out list with creatures you don't want, such as maybe mouse and rabbit and so on, as you start to feel the cloth loosening, it would be all too easy to shout out, "Bear!" at the same time the cloth falls away from the blade. Even subconsciously, you would be aware of the cloth in your hand and what animals you have and haven't said. Also, what if I perform this ceremony monthly, or weekly, or even daily? What if I get a different animal each time? Is my Fylgja rapidly transforming every day? Why would that be the case if it's supposed to be a reflection of me, yet not much has changed in my own life? It seems to me this certain ceremony can have its uses, but I personally would not find it useful or recommend it for an accurate process of discovering one's own animal guide. The fact that the ceremony can net different results feels unproductive. The multiplicity of results leads to a slot machine effect that is admittedly the opposite goal of what we hope to achieve. Any kind of ritual trying to identify something as important as one's own Fylgja should net similar or identical results often in a frequent manner. Well, then what? If not this ceremony, how can we discover more about our own Fylgja without risking personal injury or having a friend with magic eyes? I'm currently working on a full-fledged group ritual that helps people connect more directly with their animal spirit, and I can give a summary in that it honestly will take a lot of self-reflection and meditation. Myself, as the group Gothi, will work with people who want to participate in the ritual to help them honestly work through aspects of themselves and spiritually search together to find the animal that they feel most connected to so that it may be called on. If the Fylgja is meant to be a reflection of the self, then you will have to be able to see an honest and accurate version of yourself first. Setting ego and meekness aside will be essential, and being honest with yourself about who you are as a person will be the only way you can genuinely understand what your Fylgja would likely be reflecting. I know that sounds super boring, but exploring your own personal attributes and traits will help you draw parallels to finding out what animal may also hold similar traits. One final important point I want to bring up is us circling all the way back to the first saga of Olaf Tryggvasonnar that described Thorstein and his polar bear cub. The grandfather's sightseer made a statement about the boy's high lineage based on the way the Fylgja was presenting itself. I personally have a similar but different view of that situation. I think that our Fylgja being born from the well of Uther, the same well that all fate is woven from, that these animal spirits can feel the possible potential of our own fates once they are connected to us. This white bear may very well have been special, not because of Thorstein's past connections, but because of the amazing feats he grows up to accomplish in his saga before dying. The bear was not fully grown. It was not the 21-foot-tall Kodiak growling fiercely behind Thorstein. It was a small and cautious cub, showing that it still had more room to grow, reflecting the same growth potential that Thorstein was about to go through. I think that future potential can play a part not insignificant in determining a Fylgja's presentation. But as heathens, it is well known our deeds are what truly shape us, as we move through life. I don't think the gluttonous, lazy king who sits on his throne and ignores his subjects' needs and safety would have a grand dragon curled behind him on the throne. So I do not think that mere station or lineage have much to do with how our Fylgja appear. So, this has been a journey and a half, and honestly, it's not even all there was. There are other traditions that have somewhat similar concepts that could also give more insight into this topic. I started researching this several months ago as a way to help my community connect with each other and themselves more spiritually. As I said at the beginning, I think this may be the best kept secret in all of heathenry, just due to how esoteric the topic feels on the surface. I've often said there are 3 main pillars of heathenry, being the gods, the wights, and the ancestors. But now, I think there is a 4th pillar that may stand at the center of that trifecta, and that would be the Fylgja, seeing as it is you reflected spiritually and how you interact with your spirituality, whether you're aware of it or not. This has been a lot of information, and is a lot to take in. I encourage you to take some time to sit with yourself, do some self-reflection, try to get a clear idea of who it is that you are, and what your Fylgja may look like as a result. Connecting with this powerful part of our own souls can be a highly rewarding experience. Once you feel up to it, I would love to know your initial thoughts, and also any you may have as time goes on, if this concept develops in any meaningful way for you. If you want to join in on the group discussion about this topic, be sure to hop on my Discord server I run with Ocean Keltoy, and be able to chat with us directly about it and the rest of our content. If you would like to support the work that I do, please consider checking out my Patreon. Joining the Wolfpack is extremely helpful, as it supports the work that I do both here on YouTube and running the online heathen community and the growing in-person community in Atlanta, Georgia. It also lets you be a part of a smaller circle of like-minded pagans in the Discord server. With that said, a huge awoo to my Kynfylgja mates in the Wolfpack. You guys are like family, and I will always appreciate your support. And so, until next time, go big or go home.